Hello, I'm Sol Soler, and I'm a philosopher, and I'm a theoretical physicist. Okay, and so this episode is called A Logical and Scientific Theory and Proof of God, of the conscious entity that we refer to as God. Okay, so that's quite a title. It's quite a claim, but do listen to the end, because I think by the end you'll be worryingly convinced. Shocked by how convinced you are. Yeah, very shocked. Okay, so let's begin with a warning then. You may or may not believe in God. You may or may not claim to have total faith, but you probably don't have total faith. Like total, complete, unshakable, constant, ever-present faith in God. And this lecture could be the start of a life where you do start to generate that level of faith. And that level of faith, very few people have, and it's life-altering, and it makes you stand out from the crowd quite inevitably, and changes your life a lot. If you go from an atheist or an agnostic to someone who has 100% faith in God, unshakable every day, that's a huge psychological shift. That's the life-changing. I'm not saying that will happen overnight. I'm saying that could happen, a transition from atheist or agnostic. A transition this could be the start of a transitional period where you go from atheist to 100% constant faith in God. And that transition could take years. But even to find that plausible, the first thing is to find that plausible and to find God plausible. And if you're an atheist, to suddenly find God genuinely plausible is shocking. And I'm talking from experience, because I used to call myself a 99% atheist, and I was raised scientifically, educated scientifically, raised in a scientific country. And I used to say, I can't be positive there's no God. I just can't. I don't know enough about the universe to say anything with 100% certainty. Just, physics is incomplete. Our understanding of the universe is just undeniably incomplete at the moment. So I could never say anything with 100% certainty because my understanding wasn't 100%. So to insist that there's no God would require a kind of godlike intelligence where you could be 100% sure about something about this universe, which would require 100% understanding of this universe, which anyway, no human has that. So I wouldn't have been willing to say I was 100% atheist, but I would say I was 99% atheist in that. Been raised scientifically, understood the world scientifically. That's how I conceived of my world, universe, in scientific terms. That's how I decided on what really existed and what really doesn't exist. I went through this conversion from 99% atheist, where I was like, there's no scientific evidence. I can't see any concrete scientific evidence at all. And scientific belief is based on evidence. So, there just seems no evidence. It seems very unlikely for there to be a God and human souls. But then I'm a philosopher and a theoretical physicist, and I had some new ideas, and I claim that you won't have heard these ideas before. Because I'm a theoretical physicist as well, and I've had new ideas regarding the fundamental nature of consciousness that makes for new theories and allows for very plausible scientific theories of the human soul and God, which, that changes everything. That makes God, those theories make God a plausible scientific reality to people who believe things about existence based on scientific theories. So first I found God plausible. Finding God plausible led me to experiment with that possibility. So I started paying more attention to spirituality, reading different Bibles, lots of spiritual literature, lots of work on myself, meditation, huge amounts of meditation. And the most important thing was actually quitting alcohol, because I was an alcoholic for more than a couple of decades, and that had a morally corrosive effect on me. And it wasn't until I accepted that and really, really, really quit alcohol, because I'd tried to quit, the usual story, tried to quit loads of times and couldn't, and I noticed that I was tending to sabotage my own life just so I could, as an excuse to go out drinking and getting wasted. And then once I realized that, I was like, oh wow. Once I realized I was sabotaging the good things in my own life, not consciously, I wouldn't say it to myself, but that's what I would wind up doing. And then would get to be, I suddenly, a big argument with my girlfriend or whatever, then that was just automatically, I would go out and get, just drink all night and, wind up in trouble then, usually. And yeah. So obviously finding God plausible makes you take spirituality plausible, which makes you examine your own morality in more detail. See, I can say I was a good boy. I was a good boy, good son, and then my problems. Then my life, and then there was adolescent. I started drinking and lots of depression and just so much depression, basically. Anyway, so I wasn't very well, and I wasn't and part of that unwellness meant that I wasn't examining my life. I wasn't examining myself morally the way I now know that a human needs to be healthy. Anyway, so then there's a slow transition from finding God plausible and then doing these experiments with my life, trying to get off alcohol, meditation and spiritual reflection. It made my life better, and significantly better, more hopeful, and it made me happier. And then I realized, faith in God is an experiment an existential experiment that you have to carry out. And when it improves your life, once you find God plausible, once aligning your life with that possibility, once it makes your life happier and healthier, that's how you come to believe in God. And that's how God entices us to improve ourselves morally. Because when we are improving ourselves morally with a genuine concerted effort, the same way you might make a concerted effort to maintain a good body, you make, an equivalent amount of thought and time and, making it systematic. Like, people take care of their bodies in a very systematic way, a very careful way. And we don't take care of, our psychology and our morality in as systematic and careful and continuous a way. Okay. And that part of religion is realizing that to be happy and healthy and free from anxiety, we have to be making a constant systematic effort at morality, which is an integral part of religion. Okay, so that's my story, basically. So I was a 99% atheist, had certain scientific ideas that made God plausible, altered my life spiritually and morally to align with that possibility. It improved my life dramatically, made me happier, healthier, and freed me from anxiety. Freed me from a lot of anxiety, such that I'm like, that's how it works. And now I believe in God. So that's my story. So if I share the same ideas with you, and people have told me that they would like, these ideas and the possibility of much greater, stronger, more secure faith, then it could have the same effect on you. You find God plausible. Let's say if you're an atheist or an agnostic who believes in science, scientifically educated, you'll find God plausible for the first time in your life, which is amazing. It creates awe. Awe is like fear, but it's like good. feels good, and it involves shock as well. Shock at existence, how amazing existence is, how astonishing it is. So our modern culture tends, we're not a very reflective culture, so we tend not to ever be shocked by just the sheer facts of our existence. We're usually, involved in a screen somehow or other. So it could have the same effect on you. I'm just going to give a warning that finding God plausible for the first time can be a bit scary. But it's fine. You'll be absolutely fine. But if you are feeling yourself a bit overwhelmed with fear or whatever, just stop listening. That's what I'm saying. Some people want to hear these ideas, are ready for them. And some people won't be ready for them. And that's really personal, and that's down to you and your experience of life and your beliefs about the universe and your knowledge of science and things like that. So yeah, if you find the fear overwhelming, just stop listening. And if you ever want to come back to it, if you ever feel more comfortable coming back to it, come back to it. And if not, never come back to it. That's cool. So that's just some fair warning. Because you got to understand that throughout history, the way humans have always believed in God is by way of verbal, logical proof. That's what all religions are. Verbal, logical proofs of the existence of God that make the human brain respond, resonate with a yes, that's correct. That's what all religions are. Proofs of God. And then those proofs, though, they have a, best before date. Like they as language changes, as this species evolves away from that moment in time, language changes, language is constantly changing, and basically the proofs of God go linguistically and culturally out of tune. Because the species evolves and changes, and after a few centuries, our understanding of the universe and our literature has changed so much that the proofs aren't as effective. But the proofs are all when the proofs are first given, they're always immediately effective. Because they're written by someone who lives in that culture, so they're linguistically and culturally in tune with the culture at that time, which is now. So that's how religions work. So how the best example is Islam. Muhammad was a man. I can't remember if he was 37 or 39. I think he was 39. He was a philosopher. Then the angel Gabriel visited him one night when he was up in a cave and said, recite. And the word Quran actually is the Arabic word for recite, speak, say. And then Muhammad started speaking. He was terrified. Muhammad started speaking, and what came out of his mouth, even though he was illiterate, he couldn't read or write, what came out of his mouth was the greatest literary masterpiece of Islam. It had never been bettered, because Islam didn't exist until Muhammad, and it has never been bettered since. And that's 1,400 years or something. So yeah, it was kind of a literary miracle. Muhammad didn't have magical powers apart from reciting the Quran, and that was just words and a view of God, the view of the universe, and a view of society and how to shape society that was so compelling, so logical, so obviously correct, that it made people believe it was divinely inspired, and those people were the first Muslims. Okay, so that is how religion works, and I'm claiming that I've got a similar string of words, or I've got a string of words, not as beautiful as the Arabic in the Quran, but I've got a string of philosophical and scientific words and logical words that will have the same effect now on the modern scientific human brain, which kind of means religious conversion, or from faith in God to no faith. So that's how it works. And the thing is, science is a language, a descriptive language, specifically for describing the universe, and more accurately for building mathematical models of our universe. And what it turns out is that once science reaches a certain level of understanding, it actually very clearly points to the existence of a very immense intelligence that, from a human perspective, is indistinguishable from God. Okay, so that's how this proof works. So it could cause a religious conversion in you. So I'm just warning you that can be it brings about awe. Awe is actually a great feeling, but it's scary. So you need a bit of courage to experience it. It's great, it's good, you'll be glad you experienced it, but it is fearful. Like, a little bit like a roller coaster. You go up a roller coaster, you're really scared, but you ultimately enjoy the experience and are glad that you did it, if you like roller coasters. So if you like philosophical, existential roller coasters, then strap in. If not, if that scares you, then, back to your usual podcast, which is fine, no harm done. That's so totally up to you and personal. So it turns out that the proof of God works by self-fulfilling prophecy. So first let's explain. Sorry, there's just an aeroplane going overhead. Bear with me for a second. I'm outside, so you have to excuse the ambient noise. So the proof works by way of self-fulfilling prophecy. And of course it's scientific, and it's rigorously scientific. I trained as a theoretical physicist in university, and I was trained very rigorously. It was a good course, very rigorous course. Good teacher, good professors, good lecturers. A really good course. Those are my only credentials. I don't have a PhD or anything, because I left that country and was traveling, and I'm not getting into them. Those aren't the real reasons I didn't do a PhD, but they're all personal. Alcohol and depression and things, and wanting to travel and explore. Anyway. What was I talking? Oh yeah, so it was proof that works by way of self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's also a rigorously scientific proof written by a theoretical physicist. So it's also scientific proof, and scientific proofs require experiments. And there are different parts of this experiment. There are many different experiments to prove God. Some of them are physical experiments to be done by physicists. Okay, that's to get certain aspects about the fundamental physical nature of our universe clear. I've got those experiments ready. But then this is a proof of God, so it won't just be a scientific experiment, because God isn't just scientific. God is scientific. God has the intelligence to design a scientific universe, just like we would now. If we were going to design a universe, we would design it scientifically. God is more intelligent than us, so he's designed this universe scientifically, and then we've slowly but surely got more and more intelligent until we can read the science that he's used and, decipher the science that he's used to design our universe, which gets, and the logic, God's logic, gets more and more obvious to us the more and more intelligent we get. And we can't deny that we are getting more and more intelligent generation after generation as a species, despite a somewhat disastrous cultural situation at the moment. But that doesn't mean we're not, just because our culture is a disaster at the moment, an embarrassing disaster, it doesn't mean we're not intelligent. We're more intelligent than ever thanks to the internet, free education. The internet is free education. You can learn anything on YouTube from the best lecturers in the world. You can take theoretical physics courses with Richard Feynman's friend Leonard Susskind, who's works for Stanford University, and gives superb, lucid, really simple but mathematically rigorous theoretical physics courses that a few decades ago you would have had to pay millions of dollars for. Now they're free. So we're getting more intelligent as a species. The internet makes us just way more intelligent. We can just process so much more information at such higher speeds because everyone is, got a computer and everyone's using them. And they're all connected to one another. And we have instantaneous global communication, and we have a global language, which is English, and these are all requirements for world peace. And good news, world peace is very imminent. Anyway, you won't be able to believe that at the moment, but it is. Imminent means decade, I would guess. I think it could be less, but I would say approximately a decade. This world peace is inevitable. Violence is declining. Violence and war and things like that and poverty. All those things are declining at rapid rates. And not only are they declining at rapid rates, the rate at which they're declining is increasing. So it's not just rapid decline, it's accelerating rapid decline, which is exponential decline, which means, and violence and war and things like that and poverty are finite quantities. So if they're declining, they can only decline to zero because they're finite. So they decline to zero, and the speed at which they're declining is rapidly increasing. So yeah, if you do the maths, world peace, and especially with the internet, a global language, English, the fact that all the nuclear powers are friends with one another and are, intimately related in terms of trade, and none of the populations of those countries want to have nuclear war. No one wants nuclear war. And we're just becoming more peaceful, and world peace is rapidly on the way, which is good news. That's part of the proof of God. It's just one part of it. So yeah, there's these scientific experiments, but God isn't purely scientific. God's moral also. Like, God is immensely intelligent. God is scientific. God has to be scientific if he exists. And by the end of this, you'll believe that he does, I think, or find it plausible at first. And when I say he, I don't mean he. God is not a man. God is not a woman. God is he plus she plus an infinity of other things. Okay, God is much more than either of those two categories, because those are just small human categories. And we're going to make new and bigger categories in the future. And God will always be bigger than any of our categories, and God will always be bigger even than the sum total of all our categories. So God is he plus she plus an infinity of other things. But I just say he, because I don't want to have to say that jargon every time I refer to God with a pronoun. Anyway, so yeah, the proof can't just be purely scientific with my experiments in physics. There have to be other experiments. There have to be moral, spiritual experiments, because that's essential to God, essential to the existence of God. And the moral experiments, who do they have to be done by? Well, of course, by humans, which means you and everyone else. And these are just these new ways of thinking are just becoming inevitable, and there's evidence for them everywhere. So those moral experiments are, making a systematic analysis of your psychological health, because there's no such thing as sin or evil. There's just more or less psychologically well humans. We're all innocent. We're too small and insignificant to be held ultimately accountable for this, and we're not ultimately accountable. But we do have to be making our best moral effort, that's all. Which our culture at the moment actively dissuades us from doing, and that's why this culture is so sick. Okay. So there has to be experiments done by the individual, where every individual has to do an experiment for the species to prove God. See, here's the thing. We need the whole species to believe in God. Because if you believe in God it's very difficult to believe in God on your own, surrounded by people that don't, in a society as materialistic and as sick as this. So it has to be, the experiment has to be carried out by large numbers of people to prove it. So it's a scientific experiment that may or may not be carried out. But I think it would be a good idea if we did carry it out. And we'll show that God is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's the physics experiments, the purely scientific experiments, and the scientific theory of God. That's what I've taken care of. And some other things, such as the direction of humanity into the future politically, but I won't get into that's for another lecture. But then individuals and society at large has to do experiments. So each individual has to systematically address their own psychological health and their morality as part of that. And then also, as a society, as countries, as nations, we have to fix the glaring moral problems that are systemic to our governments. Okay? We have come to the conclusion, unanimously and globally, that we don't trust our governments. So something safe, not a revolution, not communism, nothing like that. Some safe, we have to have a transition from corruption to not corruption and to increase democracy. The future of this species, and this is what our phones are for, the future of this species is actually truly democratic, where all humans have a voting profile and are actually voting all the time on everything. People will be interested in maintaining their voting profile and voting on the things that they care about. You won't vote on everything. For example, you might not know economics, so you won't fill out the detailed parts of your economics voting profile, the economics section of your voting profile. You'll watch a few YouTube videos, and then there'll be professional economists who will explain, I think you should fill out your voting profile this way if you want this to happen economically. And then they'll be able to, give you a, you can click a link or, type some code such that you follow that economist's economic advice, and he fills out your voting profile for you automatically, but you can always change it yourself. But you'll be voting on everything that you care about all the time, with a voting profile that you'll learn to fill out in school and which will go live when you're 18. See how that actually is logical and it would actually work. And then in our modern world, information is power. But now, like in countries like America, people are literate enough and education is free enough that the country is actually ready. The people of the country are actually ready to take a lot, not all, but a lot of power, governmental power, back from their governments. But they need access to the information. How do you have access to the information? Well, with a voting profile. So at all times, you know what the populace wants. An active voting profile like Facebook, but it's just for voting. So you set up your voting profile. And you don't have to vote on everything, but you have to vote on what you care about. So there will be, let's say there's an economic crisis, and then the government says, we're going to bail out all the people that did it. And actually they're going to get billion-dollar bonuses. And only one man is going to go to jail for it, Bernie Madoff. Do you know how many Bernie Madoffs could have been convicted? Thousands. They just took one sheepgoat, put him in jail, even though he was no more guilty than all of his friends. And because the whole system was totally corrupt. Ask anyone, listen to Tim Dillon explain it to you. So the rich people who kind of were most responsible for it, nothing's going to happen to them. They're going to get bailed out. Middle class people and poor people, and especially poor people, fuck you. You're paying the bill. How? By being poorer, getting less money from the government. Money that you need. And, let's not get into Flint, Michigan and babies' hair falling out their heads and, weapons of mass destruction and stuff like that. You're in the dystopia. You're in the 1984, but it's just been mixed with... 1984 has been put in the blender with Brave New World, and you're living it. So now we know that. Now the species, in America, for example, is well informed enough, thanks to the internet and places like Reddit, that you all know that. So obviously, if your government is provably corrupt and bad for you, you've got to change it. So I'm not saying pitchforks out. I'm not saying tear down Washington. No, Washington's amazing. American democracy is amazing. You don't change anything first. There's no change. There's no revolution. There's no protests. Your protests are meaningless. They just watch you out on the street protest, and it turns into a party. Oh my God! I used to go to protests in Madrid. Such a wild party. A protest in Madrid is such a good time. Everyone's got a can of beer in their hands. Music, sun, awesome. Great fun, protests. But they achieve not very much politically. If they achieve anything, it's very long term, in the sense that they might inspire future generations of politicians. But in the immediate reality, they change nothing. So yeah, we just have to make start a transition from corrupt governments to non-corrupt governments, and that transition with the handing over of some of the governmental power back to the people, by way of a voting profile. So, I was saying if there's an economic crisis, for example, an unpredicted economic crisis like 2008, unforeseen in 2008, and then the government says, then everyone's like, what the fuck are we going to do? And the government says, well, we're going to bail out all the people that did it. And the poor people can pay the bill, basically. And you're going to protest for a week or two, and then you're going to go back to your home and you're going to go back to work. Because America's too good to actually destroy. Life is actually, even as bad as it is, it's still too good to actually pack up the experiment and tear it all down. You don't want to do that. There's a lot of precious stuff to be saved. So you go back to work, because what else can you do? So say you had a voting profile already up and running. And let's say it was unofficial at first, just coded by computer dudes on Reddit, and put up for people, and people start subscribing to it and filling out their voting profile. Then you could have some sort of relevant vote, such as, that would always be up on the voting profile, such as, if there's an economic crisis, the government will need to get a majority of 80%, let's say you decide on a percent, 80% of the populace's consent before they, take drastic actions such as, giving bailouts to the mega rich who caused the problem. Now you'd have to think about the wording a little bit so it was nice and general. But basically, a voting profile would allow the people of America to veto their government when it was doing something disgraceful. And come on, the American government has been doing disgraceful things where and whenever it wants for 30, 40 years now? I don't know. It's been a constant. I can tell you this, I'm 37 and it's been a constant background to my life. Is the idea that the American government is good in some ways, and we need it as a species to maintain peace. It's good to have this superpower. Like, that's what America's kind of the superpower. And there's a way in which that amount of power and their control over the world is maintaining peace. But they're still doing stuff they still regularly get caught up in reprehensible things that we all find out about. And then, we don't tear it down because it's doing more good than bad, but it's still doing some bad, and we just need to, as a people, point out that we've know those bad things and that the government has to stop doing them. So there could be vetoes. Let's say you have a Donald Trump president, and then he starts talking to a Putin president, and they're both macho men, so neither one can back down, and they're disagreeing on something, and then before long, they're about to go to war together. No one in America wants to go to war with Russia. No one in Russia wants to go to war with America. You'll watch each other on YouTube and you'll enjoy each other's content. And Russian people are cool and American people are cool in general. So but you have these people that in these men in charge, small numbers of men who, are extravagantly irrational at times. And they can just, they have the capacity to start nuclear wars. That's insanity. So if a war was about to kick off between, Russian and American politicians and army generals, then if you had your voting profile, the whole populace would be able to express unanimously, we do not want this war. And the whole Russian populace could express unanimously, we Russians do not want this war. So if every country had, every citizen has a passport, now every citizen will also have a voting profile that they get taught to use in school, and that goes live once they're 18. Now you probably think I'm nuts, but you must admit that all that is logical, simple, and possible. And then you should also understand that this is a dark age, and that there's only one good. Come on, admit this is awful. How things are, we're behaving terribly. It's deplorable. Living beneath our moral intelligence. That's the real issue, and extravagant greed. So, absurd greed. Like now, people don't just have more money; they have so much more money that they squander huge amounts of it on nothing, like on shiny rocks and Nike shoes that they don't even put on their feet, and cars and houses and private jets and watches and all this awful tacky shit, instead of helping out their fellow man who's in need. Disgraceful. So this is pretty bad. And the whole pollution and greed destroying the Amazon rainforest and polluting water in Flint, Michigan, so babies' hair is falling out, etc., etc., etc. This is awful. We need moral improvement. It needs to be rational, sensible, and logical and possible. And that idea of voting profile, corporations and politicians pay billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars for information. What a voting profile would do would be to put all that valuable information into the hands of the people so that they could understand what, if we all did understand what we wanted explicitly, it would make it much easier to make rational decisions. We'd also see the things that unite us and could focus on them. So there might be some propositions on the voting profile that achieve 90% consent, And once we know that 90% of the population agrees with something, then the government has no choice but to follow through with what they want. So if 90% of the population think Flint, Michigan, the government should immediately supply clean water to Flint, Michigan and sort out that problem. Immediately. And that means they don't get to drive around in limos anymore or go have private jets or live free of cost in fucking palaces until they can carry on with that again once Flint, Michigan has got clean water. I mean, it's an embarrassment. The only first world nation on this planet that can't provide clean water to all its citizens. What further proof do you need that your government is inept, useless? And these are just facts. These are facts that we all repeat on Twitter all day. But then you can't blame just one thing I do want to say is you can't blame the politicians, because when all the general population cares about is money and clothes and showing off that you have clothes and like the politicians are just normal Americans. And it's just American greed has got wildly out of control over the past few decades. It's greed, the healthcare system. That's greed to the point of evil, and it's the whole country, just culturally. Anyway, so again, the issue is moral. It's not political. It's all this debate, communism or capitalism. It's not political. It's moral. It's spiritual. It's about having a conscience. It's about the populace caring about one another, and the people with more and with huge amounts more helping out the people that have fallen on bad times. And the idea that a first world country as wealthy as America won't help people out with basic medicine, it's greed to the point of evil. But it's the whole, I'm just saying, because sometimes Bill Burr, will say, let's get these 1%ers and hang them out of windows, kill them, drag them down the streets. But it's not their fault. It's the whole culture. It's the whole culture. Because then it's okay for Bill Burr to, hoard huge amounts of wealth himself, but he's probably worth tens of millions now, so it's okay to be that rich and just hoard 90% of it all the time and just collect things that you don't need, and not to pick on Bill Burr, but the same with Stephen Colbert, for example. Like, he's always banging on at Trump, but he's a Christian. He's got hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's has he read the Gospels? Jesus said a young man came to Jesus and said, "How do I follow you?" And Jesus said, "Sell all your possessions and give all your money to the poor, and then follow me." And the young rich man went away all sad, because there was nothing he loved more than his wealth and his money and his riches and all that stuff. So, Trump's just honest. Trump thinks that there's no God, and that human existence is a acorn hoarding competition. Like, whoever gets the most acorns, meaning dollars, is the best. But if you're a Christian, then you got to be better than that. So you can see how the people pointing the fingers at Trump, the fingers can be pointed back at them, which just proves that it's all of us. Like, it's just all of us. We're being stupid. We're behaving stupidly. Our reaction to climate change and all, stupid. Well, like the American one was. They refused to join in with the different packs and things. That's crazy. It's not your planet to destroy. But you know, we're still behaving stupid in a lot of ways. And those ways, and we're getting better though, of course. But those stupid ways of behaving are identifiable. And here's the thing. They're all moral. They're not scientific or political. It's not a choice between communism and capitalism. Capitalism with a conscience would be just fine in America, where people could still compete to make the most money. But like once you get an unspendable amount, instead of buying shoes you don't put on your feet, you take pride in really helping poor people and changing communities and fixing problems like Flint, Michigan's water problem could have been fixed with the pocket change of all the billionaires. But they, you know, instead of doing things like that, you call it fuck you money. So, and the fact that you call it fuck you money, you know, that's your attitude to each other. You ain't got no money, fuck you. You sick and you ain't got no money, fuck you, die in the streets. Kind of, you know, that seems to be the... Unless you're being misrepresented. But that's you know, I'm online as, you know, and that seems to be what the healthcare system is. So that's wrong. It's got to change, but it's got to change rationally, sensibly, slowly, logically, and it has to all be possible. But a voting profile is possible. Okay, so and then we see, and I can guarantee you, if it did take off, if people understood the power of it, just that information being available, you know, because you could suggest your own votes. Like people it would be just like Reddit. The most important votes would be upvoted. So it'd be at the front of, you know, on the front page of your voting profile would be all the most important things that everyone is voting on most at the moment. Because if you're all voting on the most, then that's what you care about most. So different votes will be able to be suggested by anyone. Anyone can suggest a motion for votes. And the most important ones will get the most upvotes and the most attention. And then the people would start slowly not running the country, but giving orders to the government that the government couldn't possibly not comply with without revealing that it was totally anti-democratic and that it was actually not a democracy, but rather a oligarchy, which is what it really is. And all Americans should look in the mirror and say, I live in an oligarchy at the moment, because it's not a democracy. What I'm suggesting, the voting profile will make true democracy. And then we see how God, the God experiment, there's my scientific experiments, and then there's the experiments that the species can do in terms of its society. So God always has directives for society, okay? When you know, a renaissance in belief comes about, when a rebirth of belief in God comes about, there are always new directives for society at large. So, and what God wants of us is true democracy, or, you know, what God wants of countries, or what's supposed to happen. Let's say not what God wants. Just the benevolent design of the universe and that affects how our culture evolves and develops. What's next for us is true democracy. What's next for countries some countries are ready for it, some countries aren't. America's not just ready for true democracy, it's suffocating under oligarchy and it's in desperate need of true democracy. And you can see it's happening all the time. It is getting more democratic because of Twitter. Twitter is something like a political parliament. Parliament, that just means place where you speak. Parle is the French word for speak. So parliament is just a place where you go and speak, and often the parliament is dedicated to politics, and that's what a lot of Twitter is. The whole of America discussing politics and ethics and language and things like that, because that's what the species is interested in. This is the country crying out for true, systematic, true democracy, where democracy means power by the people. Demos means people, from ancient Greek. So then it's quite beautiful, you know, the founders of the world's first democratic country, you know, successful democratic country, America, born out of a democratic revolution, has another democratic revolution, but one that is totally peaceful, because it's not actually a revolution, it's a transition, where they start working on a true democracy, where each person has their votes and their voice, and it's been like, now we don't have to vote once every 4 years. That's crazy. You know, you vote all the time. Liking a YouTube video is a vote. You have voting TV shows where the whole thing is that you get to vote. That's the whole point of the TV show. And we can vote continuously, a continuous voting profile, where you're voting every single second that you have your voting profile active. Okay, so that's how democracy will work. And then you'll see God as a self-fulfilling prophecy. People will try this. The country will become more democratic. It will become fairer. There'll be less poverty, so people will be less scared. So they'll be living less anxious lives, less violent lives, less hateful lives. Because anxiety, fear is ultimately what causes, and poverty is what causes, you know, violence and things like that make everyone scared and that ruin everyone's lives. Because karma is very real. I have a mathematical theory of karma. You treat karma statistically, and you can actually treat it mathematically with mathematical theories that I've borrowed from, mathematical physics, statistical theories. You can mathematize the theory of karma, and you can prove things. You can prove moral things using mathematics. Okay. So yeah, people start behaving more democratically, which is inherently more moral. And remember, what God wants is us to behave more morally. So we'll behave more morally and more democratically. Democracy is more moral, and this will improve our lives and make us all so much happier, make Americans so much happier, and actually unite them, because you'll be able to see using the voting profile what unites you, and you'll start being fairer to your poor people and taking care of them, which will alleviate pain and suffering and guilt. And the difference will be night and day, a very rapid transition to a condition of the United States that compared to now would be considered heaven. Okay, so that's how God is a self-fulfilling prophecy. God never displays his face in the clouds and say, hey, I'm here, I'm back, it's me, it's God, what's up? I'm going to field questions for 45 minutes. No. God proves his existence via his immense intelligence, which means that all our life is planned and guided by his immense intelligence and has been thought out by his immense intelligence. And that he knows what's happening next much better than we do, and he's way more chill about it because he knows that we're all safe, because we all have souls that survive the death of the body and that reincarnate into new human bodies in the future where things are better. But this is a continuous process. Evolution goes on forever, and it's actually eternal evolution that is heaven. Okay, so God knows that. So he knows, he's totally chill about what's happening because he knows it's all going to be fine, because he's planned it all. God in this theory is a consciousness with just immense intelligence, formed by the actual universe itself. Okay, but will I get into that just now? Yeah, I'll start getting into that just now. So, yeah. This true democracy and people taking a look at themselves morally and starting to look where it's their fault and what they can do to help, and where are they being greedy, where are they squandering money where they could be helping their fellow man. If people start doing that in significant numbers, it is obvious that it will improve everything. And it will make life so good, you'll be like, wow, this is amazing how this has worked out. Now I definitely believe in God, because now I understand that we just have to improve ourselves morally, because that's what God needs us to do as part of our moral evolution. But we have to act it first. We have to do it first. We have to be that good first. Show that we are willing to be better than this and make that effort to change ourselves, because it does take effort to actually change yourself. So we're trying to, America would be trying to change itself as a country, from a corrupt democracy and oligarchy into a true democracy, because that's better, and that's without hating the politicians. They're no worse than anyone else. The whole of America is just way too greedy. That's just obvious fact. You don't care about each other. When you have more money, you say, fuck you. That's fucked up. So again, the issue isn't political. It's not a choice between capitalism and communism. It's ethical. But it has to become conscious for the whole country. You need to start talking about these things. Realize that you're talking too much about politics and not enough about spirituality. But there's a reason you're not talking about spirituality, and that's because you believe there's no God. So the real issue, the real cause of it all this pain, all this suffering, the real fundamental root cause is that none of you believe in God, or not none of you, but most modern Americans, educated, definitely the ones educated in science, don't believe in God. And most everyone in America has been educated in science. And science has been saying recently and very aggressively that there's no God. So that's why everyone is scared. You think this is your one and only existence, and that terrifies you. You think you're going to stop, when you die, you're going to stop existing for eternity. And there's no scarier thought than that. So you have to never look at it. So it gets pushed into your subconscious, and it causes mental health problems for everyone. That's everyone. Because to stop existing for eternity is the scariest possible thing you imagine. But you also believe that is what's going to happen, because you think science has proved it to you. That's for most people, most scientific atheists. Like Stephen Hawking said that science proves God doesn't exist. That's an outrageous thing to say, because he's just a single human brain, and our understanding of physics is very far from complete. And the history of science shows us one thing and one thing only: this universe will always surprise us. Just gets stranger and more immense and more awesome every time we make a significant scientific revelation. So now we get to the actual scientific proof of the entity God and the human soul. And then we have to get into consciousness, the nature of consciousness, which is my area of expertise as a theoretical physicist, because like Isaac Newton wrote the principles of mechanics, he wrote Principia Mathematica, which are the mathematical principles of analyzing the dynamics of macroscopic objects. Okay, I've written the principles of the physics of consciousness, which are the simple scientific principles that physics needs to understand consciousness, give the correct interpretation of quantum mechanics, and solve the hard problem of consciousness. Okay, and these principles of physics not only do that, but they also allow for the first scientific models of God and scientific theoretical models of the human soul. And these models, these scientific models, and they're rigorously scientific based on my new principles, they make God so plausible that the human mind can't help but believe in God, especially in conjunction with everything else. Models of the mind of God. So I've written these models. They're up on this same YouTube channel, and you can study them. And the more you study them, the more your faith in God will increase, which is good, because what you need is a new picture of the universe in your mind. You have an old picture. If you're educated scientifically, this is why scientists believe in atheism, because the picture of the universe that science currently paints is one of a non-conscious universe where none of the energy or particles, basic energy or particles, are conscious. And so the universe at large is dead and not intelligent and not conscious. So then human conscious existence is just an anomaly. We just come into existence somehow. Science doesn't know how. Suddenly our consciousness switches on around non-conscious energy and particles. They have no theory as to how that happens. The reason they have no theory as to how it happens is because that's not what happens. It's wrong. It's the wrong assumption. And then they haven't seen any physical evidence for a human soul, so they've concluded, and because of Newtonian mechanics, they think the universe is deterministic, despite quantum mechanics proving that it isn't, and despite their own experience of life proving that it isn't. They've decided that the universe is deterministic and cold and dead and not conscious and not intelligent. And they think that when they die, they just stop existing forever, which terrifies them. Because that terrifies them, and it terrified me. Like that was the scariest thought. You know, I spent a lot of time. I spent really a lot of time, especially in my teenage years, being really, really scared of that prospect, which is what science is telling you is going to happen to you. Okay, so you can't. Given that if you believe in science, then you believe that's the case. Then you can't be secure in your universe. Your universe is kind of an enemy because it's going to kill you and annihilate you forever. So you don't. That's the root cause of all your anxiety. I'm claiming now to you. Okay, but now I can show a way of freeing yourself from all that anxiety. So, yeah. So, if you know anything about science, you'll know that at the moment, consciousness is a scientific mystery. There's no scientific understanding of consciousness until my principles. And let me explain why there's been no understanding. Because scientists have all been working under one particular assumption. And that assumption is that the basic energy that came into existence in the Big Bang was devoid of consciousness. They've been working under that one assumption all the time. All their theories assume that. And then they try and ask, well, how, when these non-conscious energy and particles, how when you put them together into a human configuration, how is the human configuration conscious? And there's just been a big fat I don't know, with lots of nonsense theories and jargons for over 100 years. There's just no theories like that work. It's exactly equivalent, the analogy is perfect, to the Copernican Revolution, where before Copernicus, all the astronomers were putting the Earth at the center of the solar system, and then the theories of the solar system that they made were convoluted and mathematically intractable and uneconomical and illogical. But they always put the Earth at the center, but the Earth's not at the center. So every time they tried to make a theory, it was garbage because the Earth isn't at the center. Then Copernicus puts the sun at the center and everything makes immediate sense. And the planets trace beautiful ellipses around the sun. Okay, so a similar thing has happened where all the scientists, for particular scientific and historical reasons, have assumed that basic energy and particles are non-conscious and that the energy created in the Big Bang was totally devoid of consciousness. They're assuming that. They always start with that as the basis of their theories, and then for 100 years, more than 100 years, they've totally failed to come up with a way to explain how the non-conscious particles and energy, when you put them into the formation of a human, consciousness is suddenly there. And you experience consciousness within yourself. What you need to do, so what I'm doing is, I take the place of Copernicus here, and I change the postulate, and I use the postulate. My theory is based on the postulate, and all scientific theories are based on postulates, by the way. So this is rigorously scientific. This is the philosophy of science and how it works. I changed the postulate to all the basic energy created in the Big Bang possessed consciousness as an intrinsic property. So that energy that came into existence in the Big Bang was conscious. It was physical energy, and all of it was conscious within itself, just like you are. So physical energy is physical consciousness. All energy has all its physical properties, and it's conscious. It has conscious experience within itself. Now, we don't know what that conscious experience was in the Big Bang, but the future of my principles of the physics of consciousness will answer questions like that. But that will take some time, After Newton published his principles, it took 400 years until classical mechanics would be considered complete. So likewise, the physics of consciousness will expand outwards from my principles and answer questions such as what was the first conscious state of the universe at t = 0. But yeah, you change the postulate to all the physical energy was conscious at t = 0 in the Big Bang. And then, and you can check this because I've put all the physics online on this same channel, then you can construct a simple, logical, and intuitive physics of consciousness that can be used to construct theoretical models of conscious systems. Just like Newtonian's mechanics worked for all macroscopic systems, macroscopic dynamics of simple objects, my principles work for all conscious systems that can be applied generally across all problems of consciousness. And I show that in my lectures, and I state my principles. And you can check them. They're really easy to understand. They're super simple, super logical. and quite beautiful. And here's how do we know that they're true? Well, I have some experiments to be carried out once universities take notice of me. There are some particular experiments we can do to verify my theory, but it's already proved because I used the principles to give the correct interpretation of the experiments of quantum mechanics. So quantum mechanics is this branch of physics that began with a guy called Max Planck, and then Einstein and Schrödinger and all those guys in the early 1900s. And it is a very mysterious branch of physics, and they tried to interpret what does it mean about the basic nature of our universe, and they came up with some interpretations. Well, they came up with one in particular at first, but none of them really found it very satisfying, and they were always like, well, this is the best interpretation we've got, but yeah, it's really, really strange, really, really confusing, really, really counterintuitive, and no one was happy with it then. Especially Einstein, who hated it, and Einstein's just always right in the end. And since then, there have been many other interpretations, and none of them have, some better than others, but none of them have, been considered obvious, logical, simple enough to be considered definitely true so far. But if you apply my principles of the physics of consciousness to the experiments of quantum mechanics, you get a simple, logical, and intuitive interpretation of the experiments that I think children as young as 10 or 11 years old could understand. So extremely simple, so extremely obvious as the correct interpretation. So that proves my theory beyond doubt. And then of course, what does my theory have to say about God? Well, it's God is a conscious entity. The human souls are conscious entities. So science can't have said anything about them yet because science hasn't understood consciousness. So science just has nothing to say on their existence. Now we finally have a scientific understanding of consciousness thanks to my principles. So what I've shown in lectures that I've entitled Principia Theologica. So this is theoretical theology. I've used my principles to construct the first theoretical models of the mind of the universe, which is the mind of God. So all energy is conscious. So then it's not just humans that are conscious. Everything is conscious, from simple particles to the sun, to the sea. It's all conscious. It's just having very different conscious experience. Like a particle is so much simpler than the human that it has proportionally much simpler conscious experience. So it just feels forces. If it's accelerated, it can feel the acceleration, feel the force of the acceleration, just like you can feel accelerated in a car. We'll have a similar type of accelerated conscious experience. And it can make basic decisions to turn in this direction or turn in that direction, or to quantum tunnel through a barrier, or to land on a screen at a particular place. It makes all these quantum decisions, but that's it. It doesn't have any it's just a particle. To be intelligent like a human, to have a personality and an ego and all those things, you need a big human brain. Neuroscience proves this. So they don't have an electron doesn't have a big human brain. It's just a single point of physical point of consciousness that can make very simple decisions, but it has no sense of like, woo, I'm an electron. Nothing like that, because it doesn't have the intelligence to have a language or ego or anything like that. It's just bare conscious experience. But when you put these conscious particles into very complex configuration, such as a human with a complex human brain, then the conscious experience is really complex, and it's, you're experiencing that right now. Complex human conscious experience. Okay, so everything's conscious. Trees, stars, and some of these formations are less intelligent than us. An electron is less intelligent than us. But some of these formations of conscious energy are more intelligent, of course. So a galaxy, all the stars in the galaxy are connected to each other, shining light to and from each other, and collecting absorbing all that light and then emitting the light. So they're all in conscious physical connection with each other, and they would form a very immense brain, an intelligence so much greater than human intelligence that it's equivalent to God. The mind of God is made out of the universe, and these huge intelligences are moral and appreciate beauty and things like that, just like you do. You're made out of the same stuff, and you're moral, you appreciate beauty and things like that, and you take moral considerations, so do these other greater intelligences. And in fact, they're more moral than us, because as we can see from human existence, morality actually increases with intelligence. We're more moral than chimpanzees because we're more intelligent than them, so we can have a more nuanced view of existence and morality. So, so there are now, thanks to my theory, there are possibilities of intelligences existing that are much, much greater than ours. Now, they'd be much different. So, for example, in my theory, the sun is one singular, creates a singular center of consciousness within itself, just like you have a singular center of consciousness within yourself. You feel like one singular person, and all your conscious experience comes to a center via your central nervous system. The sun also has a center of consciousness. We've got to understand it. It's not a human. It has such a different form. It's had a different evolution. It hasn't lived through human life and lived through human experiences. And it doesn't have a human form. So its conscious experience is much, much different to humans. Just like a jellyfish, for example, has a much different conscious experience than a human does. Because it's got a different type of brain, a smaller brain, and doesn't have arms and legs. It has 8 weird jelly legs. And, its conscious experience is inevitably, whilst we know a jellyfish is conscious, we know its conscious experience is wildly different than ours. So a sun is also conscious, but its experience is wildly different from ours. And the sun, when you analyze it using physics and you apply my principles of consciousness, something like a sun becomes a very immense brain. Now, I would think it would have much different concerns than a human, much different thoughts. But what we can see is that our conscious sun has played an integral role in life on Earth. So if the sun is a brain, it would be a brain so big, because the sun is just so immensely big. The sun takes up 99.99% of the mass of the solar system. Like the whole solar system is basically the sun. It looks like a big brain when you apply the principles of the physics of consciousness, because it has plasticity. If you watch it, it's always moving all the time. And those would all be new configurations of the mind, which correspond to new thoughts. And if you count it, now it doesn't have neurons, but all the particles in the sun, all the atoms, the hydrogen and helium atoms are all conscious entities. Like they would function as conscious neurons, like the neurons in your brain are conscious as well, and that's how you think. You move them around, you shape them like clay into new ideas, new thoughts. The sun would be doing the same with its hydrogen and helium atoms in different ways. It would be a different type of brain to a human brain, but its processing power would be immense. And it also would have spent the last however many billion years just thinking. And it's also been looking at the Earth, and this shining its conscious light on the surface of the Earth has brought about life, because we know that if the sun hadn't been there, then we know that there would be no life on Earth. It's absolutely, sunlight is essential to all life. And it's also the origin of life. Sun shining on the Earth when it was covered in nothing, just plain basic Earth. The sun shining on it. That intelligence, that intelligent consciousness shining on it and inspiring it is what has turned the basic consciousness that is the Earth into more complex forms, such as cells and then amoebas and viruses and plants and sea life and fish. And the fish come out of the ocean and they get legs, and then they start breathing oxygen, and then they turn into mammals over billions of years. But this is all conscious evolution, that the consciousness of the very immense intelligence that we call the sun is playing an integral part in. Okay, so ultimately my theory is monotheistic. I think the universe does have a singular center of consciousness that we are all affecting. But then there are other immense intelligences that God has created, that the universe has created out of itself, such as the sun. And the sun would be our local proxy to God, like a local intelligent, part of God's intelligence that's taking care of life here on Earth and guiding its evolution. Again, this intelligence of the sun would be if we were to, mathematically estimate it, it would be, from a human perspective, just infinite. And it's, playing a part in guiding the evolution here. And it's much, much less worried about things because it knows, unlike you, that you have an eternal, a soul within you that leaves your body at the point of death and connects to a fetus at some later point. So the reason the species is evolving is because we all have souls that go through each life experience, and it's this we learn, we get more intelligent, and we evolve through experience. So the more we experience being a chimpanzee, we get better and better at it, and this getting better and better and more intelligent is the conscious process of evolution. Evolution is a conscious process involving a soul that is some core conscious experience that continues into a new body after death. Anyway, my theory shows Principia Theologica, because that I can't give enough detail here, but Principia Theologica in this particular lecture, Principia Theologica show how to use the principles to make the first plausible scientific models of the mind of God, the mind of the universe, and the physical human soul. So the human soul is actually made out of the basic energy and particles of this universe. Okay, it's not some mystical other substance. Heaven isn't this place in the clouds. Heaven here is on earth, and it's continuous evolution into the future, which is obviously getting better and better and more exciting as we evolve. Compare human life to chimpanzee life. Human life is way better, more expansive, more interesting, more intelligent, more beautiful, more loving, etc. So heaven is actually the future. And you have a physical soul made of the basic physical energy and particles of our universe. Electrons, protons, and neutrons in a special small configuration. Because according to science, everything that exists is made of physical energy and particles. So if our souls exist, they also have to be made of physical energy and particles. And these souls are totally safe. Even if terrible things happen to you in this life, the only thing that can be really permanently damaged is your body, because your soul is a quantum molecule, so it has quantum particles. And if you've studied science, you'll know that quantum molecules have quantum wave particle duality, which means that they can at will turn into waves. They can behave, they are observed to behave as waves and as particles, and they can perch in different places. Like you can set up a screen and fire an electron at it. It will act like a wave as it approaches the screen, and then it will perch on the screen as a particle. Now your soul can do the same thing. It's more complicated than an electron. But it can, if the body is damaged, it will take on waveform and leave the body. And there's evidence for this in the form of near-death experiences, reports of near-death experiences. They sound like a quantum, like your consciousness becomes a wave and starts, moves away from your body and then recollapses into your body sometimes during near-death experiences. So your soul can take on waveform, reconnect with the surrounding energy of the universe, and then recollapse into a new human body in the form of a fetus, and then take control of that new body that's been prepared for it in the womb of the mother. So then, in this sense, we see that the Old Testament, the first, Genesis, the Old Testament, how God created life out of the earth, just picked up the clay of the earth. That's exactly what the Son has done. So that's how, the Old Testament is a great piece of theology. The Son is God's immense intelligence, shining on the basic clay of the earth that was conscious, but only very simply, and not in this complex way that humans are conscious. And the intelligence of the Son has raised, through evolution, through the long process of evolution, has raised creatures such as ourselves out of that basic clay. Because, all of us are only made of what was here on the earth, before what we call life began. So that is quite beautiful how this scientific theory lines up with the Old Testament, Genesis and the Old Testament. Okay. So that's just a brief outline. If you listen to more of my lectures, and if you study the principles of the physics of consciousness and you see how they work, you see how they solve the mystery of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics and consciousness are twin mysteries. If you solve quantum mechanics, you immediately solve the mystery of consciousness, because they're twin mysteries. Consciousness is intimately related to both. So I had an idea about the two-slit experiment that led me to solve quantum mechanics, and then I immediately solved the hard problem of consciousness. And then you can study Principia Theologica, where you can become familiar with the models of the human soul. They need much more development. My models are way too simple at the moment. They're way too simple, but that's how physical models always start. The first models that Isaac Newton did were the simplest models done with his principles, as beautiful and as amazing as they are. So these models are simple, but they do make God, the mind of the universe, a plausible scientific reality, and they do make the human soul a plausible scientific reality, which gives scientists, people who've been educated in the scientific world, it gives them permission within their mind, within their rational mind, it gives them permission to finally find God plausible, and therefore to try a little experiment in their life where they say, okay, now I find God plausible, I find God possible, so let me align my behavior and my thinking with that possibility and see if my life improves. So that's what I'd advise you to do. So Principia Theologica, that series of lectures, will guide you in doing that, and I hope in the long run these ideas help to relieve you of a lot of this anxiety that the world is suffering from at the moment. Make you realize that this is all just a stage in our evolution, and everything in the most ultimate sense is going to be absolutely fine. We got this far, and it's quite amazing how far we've got, and it's not going to end here. And you do have a soul, and you don't have to fear death anymore, because the universe isn't going to annihilate you for eternity. You're going to have more conscious experience, and you're going to continue being yourself, and you're on an evolutionary journey where you're going to become more and more. You were, a few 100,000 years ago, you were something more like a chimpanzee. Now you're capable of piloting a human body and piloting a human brain and being a human. And in the future, you'll be something superhuman, or in other words, divine. So, yeah. Oh, and you do have free will. My physics of consciousness proves that you do have free will, which is great. It's just limited free will. You can't do anything you want, but the universe around you sets up constraints, and you can choose what you want to do from limited sets of possibilities. So you can't fly, for example, but you can choose to get up and go for a walk. That's limited free will, and it's genuine just as you feel it's genuine every single day of your life. So hopefully this was all good news. At the moment, the consciousness community are ignoring me because they want their theories to be right, and mine is very obviously right. So they're just ignoring me now, even though they're modifying their Wikipedia pages to align their theory more with mine. This after me sending them my definition in good faith. But anyway, and most of them are atheist. I don't know what's going on really, but it's a bit strange. But do check out all my physics is very clearly correct, and then you can believe that ultimately you're safe in this universe isn't your enemy, and that you have a human soul that has free will, just like you feel like you have free will every day, and that can experience love, and that is moral. You're intrinsically moral. If you do something bad, your soul feels bad, and that makes you feel bad throughout your entire body, because your soul is at the center of your central nervous system, and it is in control. That's why every day of your life you feel like one conscious person, one conscious entity, because you're one conscious soul surrounded by your conscious body. And what your soul does is it has conscious perception, and it makes your decisions. So you decide what you want to do. You decide you want to get up and go for a walk. That's you deciding, and the part of your body that makes that choice, like actually decides, yes, now I'm going. Not the part that says, yes, now I'm going. That's that's your brain. That's your soul using your brain to speak. I'm talking pre-verbally, the part that feels, yes, I'll go now. That's your soul, and that witnesses, consciously perceives your universe around you, and consciously chooses your actions. And that part of you learns from each and every life you live, and that's how evolution takes place. And that's why humans keep on getting more and more moral, because we are intrinsically moral creatures, so we keep trying to be better even though we fail. We keep trying to be morally better. And that's why we are morally better, because we keep consciously trying to be morally better. Now we're far from perfect, but we're a hell of a lot better than we were 400 years ago in Shakespeare's day, when they used to put heads on sticks across the Thames. We're a hell of a lot better than 2,000 years ago in Jesus' day, when a guy comes along preaching peace and they nail him to a cross. We're better than that now. At least I hope we are. Okay. So that's the whole deal. Yeah, that was very fast and very, that was a very, that was a summary. So you might still have more questions and doubts, and I think the vast majority of those doubts will be answered in my physics lectures. So they're on this same channel. They're already up, particularly the interpretation of quantum mechanics, and also in Principia Theologica, which is a series of lectures explaining the physics of God. Okay. 120. So there you go. That's the summary. So if you're interested in all those things, and if you're interested in being free from the fear of death and free from anxiety, and would like to joyously believe that you're a divine being, study the rest of my lectures. And yeah, I hope this was good news. Think about it, because I'm sure you think I'm crazy, but none of it actually was crazy. It was logical, simple, and possible. It's just shocking. Don't mistake shocking for crazy. It's definitely shocking, sure, but it's not crazy. Revolutions do happen, renaissances do happen. The American country was born out of a revolution. Now, again, I'm not talking about revolution, because revolutions are dangerous and damaging. I'm talking about slow transition and just the people getting access to information via a voting profile. Unofficial at first. It's just obviously a good idea, and it would change things for the better. So don't mistake shocking for crazy. It is shocking, but it's also simple, logical, and possible. And what are we doing now? Surely this is the best suggestion. I'm not you want to keep playing these games with these politicians? Not to blame the politicians, it's just the system is so corrupt. You think Barack Obama wanted anything to do with poisoning poor people's water in Flint, Michigan? I doubt it, but he got talked into it, because people that know that system way better than he knows it told him, well, we got to do this because this, and this. And he's like, oh shit, I guess we do got to do it. The system's fucked. So you need better ideas, better thinking, and change does not come about by writing it on a placard and walking around the streets having what's basically a party. That's not how change comes about. It comes about through reflection, thinking, meditation, and looking at yourself, pointing the fingers back at yourself. Because at the moment, America are just bickering on Twitter and just blaming others, pointing outside of themselves. Everyone point at Trump and blame Trump for a while. Well, you're just as bad as Trump, okay? If you're a millionaire or billionaire and you're collecting shoes you don't put on your feet and you're flying around in private jets, or if you're a poor person and that's all you ever dream about doing, and it's all you really want, then you're all just as bad as Trump. And let's face it, America's in a deplorable condition. So, give it a try. What have you got to lose? Or else, don't claim that you want change. Because real change will be difficult, scary, but you got to be brave. The way we're living now is very cowardly. But anyway, those are the ideas. At the very least, maybe you don't believe with the God, maybe you don't vibe with all the God stuff, but the voting profile is definitely a good idea. Look, there are lots of clues that America's becoming more and more democratic. It's just happening unofficially. Americans are just well educated now, and they have the internet, and they have WikiLeaks and stuff, so they just know what's going on. That's democracy. That's information getting into the hands of the people. And then you have YouTube, where people are educating themselves for free. That's democracy. All the people educating themselves all the time for free. That's very democratic. It's just happening unofficially, and you need to become conscious of it and make a conscious effort at true democracy. That's good. So even if you don't like all the God stuff, the voting profile is a good idea and worth trying. But yeah, God is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because here's the thing about God. So let me sum it up with this little thought experiment. Imagine if everyone took their best idea, every individual took their best idea. Let's say we just did this in America. Every individual American took their best idea of God. Like, okay, we don't know if God exists, but some people think he does, and some people think he doesn't. But everyone has an idea of what God is. And it's not a certain idea, but you have some model in your head of what God would be if he were to exist. So you take that model of God, whatever it is, personal to you, whatever your religion or whatever, atheist or Jew or Christian or whatever, you take that model and you think to yourself, if it was a good God who cared about us and we were actually safe because we have souls, what would he advise? What would he advise? And then things become really obvious, right? He would advise, stop being so absurdly greedy and help each other out. Don't wait for your politicians to do it for you, because your politicians are inept. So stop waiting for inept people to be effective. That's stupid. So you're going to have to do it yourself. You'd advise helping each other out and being more democratic and being more moral. So it's funny, whilst we can't know for sure if God exists, we can know for sure what he would advise us to do. Oh, and calm down and take care of the planet. Get in line with the ecosystem, be kinder to animals. So, and if we all, and he would also say you need to take a look at yourself and stop aggressively pointing blame at other people. Like we're now just being aggressive and blaming others, and it's getting absurd. It's all of us. So he'd also advise to take moral responsibility for ourselves and start, instead of looking out to blame, see where can I improve? Where am I being greedy? Where am I being selfish? Where am I being unreasonable? Where am I being intolerant? Instead of the mayhem of blame that's taking place now, and it's all absurd and phony. And phony, the spelling of phony needs to change to PHONEY, because it's all a bunch of bullshit. And come on, you know it is. Guy in the Olympics gets fired because he bullied someone in school. What who can work then? Who didn't bully someone in school? A little bit here and there, some people didn't, but the majority of us did, especially of a particular age. Well, actually, I have no idea about age. Everyone fucking bullied someone sometime or other. That's part of us. Pretending that it's not part of us is the problem. We should rationally accept that it's part of us and then act accordingly. So, God would advise us to do all those things. And isn't it funny that God's advice would work if we did it? God's advice, and I'm not associated with any religion. I've read all the Bibles, and they're all talking. All the main Bibles are talking about the same God, and I can prove that actually. All the main Bibles are talking about the one and the same God. So, but I'm not affiliated with any particular religion. All of the religions can use my science as an adjunct to their own religions. It's just, all I'm saying is that God designs universes using scientific principles because he was trying to avoid chaos. That's all. And then I'm just deducing those principles. Some of them, not all of them yet, but quite a few of them. Isn't it funny that we live in a universe where we can come up with God's advice, his most obvious advice, and we can see that if we did make an effort at it, if we just in large numbers made an effort at it, that things would improve. So it's funny. We do live in a universe where God may or may not exist, but behaving genuinely, so it has to be genuine, that's the key thing, genuinely behaving as if he did, would improve things, which is very suggestive that we do actually live in a universe designed by a benevolent, intelligent, moral being. Okay. So, I think things are awful at the moment, so this is my desperate plea to, let's collectively decide to be better and more moral, and let's collectively make an effort at less corrupt politics and true democracy, and it will be the people themselves who will have to do that. Because if there's one thing a politician is never going to do, that is freely offer up power, relinquish power. Politicians won't do that. So you'll have to demand it from them. And you do that by making your voices heard by way of online voting profile. Unofficial at first, sure. But, Facebook started unofficially, and before long, everyone was on it. Facebook is unofficial. It's not connected to the government. We all know the story of how Facebook, he just programmed that site, and before long, everyone's on it. So some dude will, or some person will program a particularly good and usable voting profile where for Americans to collect information about themselves on. And that information will be invaluable to the people as they begin to give directions as a single conscious entity. The populace will give certain directions to the government, which they obviously have to follow. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So an hour and a half. That was all in summary. So there may be gaps, places where you're like, oh, well, what about this? What about that? Leave those in the comments. I don't mean any offense by this. This does have to do with religion, but it doesn't. I'm not in any way competing with religion. I'm saying that I believe in the same God. I see the same God described in the Bhagavad Gita as in the Old Testament, as in the Gospels of Jesus, as in the Quran, as in the writings of Guru Nanak. I think it's one immense intelligence that is repeatedly being discovered by different cultures, and of course they get the essentials the same, but they disagree on the details because they're different cultures, and these books ultimately aren't written by God, they're written by men. So their culture kind of leaves, they leave a cultural fingerprint on their image of God that they put together. And mine is just using science to write theoretical models of God. Okay. To strengthen all faith in God, regardless of what religion you are. Okay, so that's my idea. People say, "Oh, do you have a better idea?" Well, I think that is a better idea than just to continue with these politicians as they just repeatedly prove themselves unworthy. Or not all of them. Not saying some of them aren't good and great, but it's too high a number of them prove themselves unworthy too regularly and too predictably, and all in the same ways. And it's obviously systemic. It's systemic corruption. But the solution is not to tear things down. The solution is to slowly steer them in better directions, in a rational, democratic way, by way of a voting profile. Okay, I'm just repeating myself. So there you go, check out my other lectures. That was an attempt to convince you of God, give you some hope for the future, hope for your eternal soul. Okay, so yeah, check out my other lectures. Thanks for listening. All the best. Oh, and I'll end with a prayer, actually. A Buddhist prayer that I like. And I think, okay, even forget the voting profile. Maybe if we all just said this prayer, repeated this prayer 3 times in the morning every day, maybe that would, have an effect on our subconscious, that we all just started, So here's the prayer. May all beings be blessed by the 3 jewels. May the planet be at peace. May the earth stay beautiful. May all beings be happy. May all have good fortune.